I've probably lost count, but I think this may be lecture 11. Previously, we talked about the northern part of Africa, that north of the Sahara Desert. Now we're going to look at Sub-Saharan Africa, the region of Africa below the Sahara Desert. And as you can see, looking at the cities of Africa, all the major cities are going to be around the Sahara Desert and not in the Sahara Desert because it's desert. I mean, it's going to be dry. Looking at the physical geography of Africa, if you can see this map, you have some mountains in the north, the Atlas Mountains, some mountains in the middle of the Sahara that you really can't see because they're covered by sand for the most part. And then the middle section of Africa, the heart of Africa, is mountains and plateaus. So these elevated sides that are kind of like a table, if you want to think of it like that, the tablelands of Africa. Typically, Sub-Saharan Africa is elevated. It's very dry in general. The Sahara is the desert itself. The area just south of the Sahara is called the Sahel. And the Sahel is this transition zone that gets a little bit of rain, but it's still fairly dry. Several people live in the Sahel region and farm there. There's also a place called the Rift Valley, which is a place where plates are separating. I'll get to that in a second. The Congo is the central part of Africa. It's an actual rainforest. And then we have the southern part of Africa. So the Sahara is the desert, the very top up here. It's very, very, very dry. Some people do live in the Sahara, but very few. Below that is the Sahel. It's the region just below the Sahara. It's a convergence zone is what us geographers like to call it, because it's kind of a transition between, well, it's a convergence zone because it's where some storms do come up during specific parts of the years. We call them monsoonal rains. And so late into July, August, September, you'll get rains in this area that'll move further north. South of this line, it's fairly wet. North of this line, it's very dry. And you can kind of see this rainfall map of that region kind of up close. This is the country of Mali. This is Mauritania, if you want to look at your maps at home. Chad, Niger. And you can see the very, very dry regions of Mali where they get almost no rainfall. And in the same country, you get this really kind of middle dark green color right here where they get a fair amount of rain, precipitation, especially right here on the very tip of Mali. They get a lot of rain right there. So all of this in the same country. But you can see how there are strata or layers of rainfall they receive throughout the year. And you can see here, the northern limit of cultivation is this line right here. Above this line, farmers cannot farm. So for most of the country of Niger, which is right here, is the country of Niger, over half of it you cannot live in. It's not farmable, and you have to farm to live there because they don't just mass produce tons of crops. So most of the people that live in Niger live here. Same thing in Mali. Most people that live in Mali live here. Mauritania, they live either along the coast or the very southern fringe of Mauritania. There's a satellite image of the country of Mali. You can see that it is just bone dry in the northern reaches, nice and green and lush in the southern part, same country. There are also two major deserts of the southern part of Africa. The Namib, which is right along the coastline. Yes, a desert along the coast. It does happen. And the other one is the Kalahari, which is kind of in the middle of southern Africa. Both very dry. One of the cool features is the Okavango Delta. This is where a river empties out into land. It doesn't actually empty out into an ocean. If you go to, say, New Orleans, you see the Mississippi River. It goes on and it continues on out into the Gulf of Mexico. Well, the Okavango River just flows out to this delta, this area in the middle of this desert that fills with water when it becomes the rainy season. It's just the weirdest thing. It's really neat. There's a really cool video I wish I had time to show you about the Okavango Desert. But if you look up, go to YouTube and type in Okavango Delta floods or something like that, you'll see how animals will travel thousands of miles to this area because they know this area is about to flood. When it floods, a lot of life moves there. Elephants, monkeys, zebras, ox, all sorts of things. So it's really kind of neat. And that's what it looks like during the flood season. This is the Rift Valley. And the Rift Valley it actually runs from northern Israel through the Red Sea, through Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania. And these are where tectonic plates are separating. Where these plates separate, you get this kind of sinking of the space in between them. And so you got this clear valley that's not formed by water rushing like the Grand Canyon, but is formed by the plates of the earth separating from each other, forming this rift, this gap here. And that's kind of what's happening. The plates are moving apart, and the middle is sinking down in between it, and that's what you have right here. And there are several major lakes of Africa. Most of them are going to be in the east, such as Lake Tanganyika, which is there, Lake Malawi. These are both in rift valleys. You can kind of see where the Rift Valley is right here. And then Lake Victoria, which is right there, south of Uganda and north of Tanzania. There is a rainforest. It is a very large one. You can see how dark green the satellite image of the Democratic Republic of Congo is. And they have elephants there. They have lots of different things. It's like a real jungle, what you would imagine. That's the Congo River right there. You can see no cities, no settlements, just trees. And there's a lot of wildlife there. You have giraffes and monkeys, zebras, hippos. Hippos actually kill more people than do elephants or any other jungle creature. Because you got to think if they're moving on boats, hippos are going to be out there in the water also. The highest point in Africa is Mount Kilimanjaro. It's actually on the border between Tanzania and Kenya. Technically, it's in Tanzania, but just barely. And even though Kilimanjaro is right along the equator, the hottest part of the earth, there's snow on top of it. But because of global warming, yes, it does actually happen, Kilimanjaro is slowly losing its ice pack. And by 2015, there will be no ice on top of Mount Kilimanjaro. Outside of Kilimanjaro, you have this area. And if you've ever watched the movie The Lion King, this is where they live, the savannah. It's tropical, and half the year it rains, the other half of the year it's bone dry. But it is a tropical environment. There are no frost there. There are a lot of early civilizations throughout Africa, the Mali, the Nubia, the Songhai. I just realized Mali's on there twice. And then from these early civilizations, you end up with some slave trade that comes from West Africa, Angola, Mozambique. The slave trade actually originated probably with the Greeks and the Romans and the Egyptians, even before them, taking people from Africa and making them slaves in Europe or parts of Asia. Well, when the European powers moved to the New World, which we'll get to later, they also brought with them slaves. And over time, 12 million or so slaves moved from Africa to the New World. This is a recreation of one of the civilizations of the Songhai, which is in Mali. There's the remnants of the Zimbabwe tribe. You can see that they had this wall built around this little bitty city here that served as protection. So yes, they built walls. They did have some civilizations that were advanced. You can see where the slaves are moved from Mozambique. They're typically moved the other way, but also moved from the Ivory Coast, Gold Coast, the western coast of Africa to Europe, North America, South America. Most ended up moving to Brazil. That's where the majority of slaves moved. But in the United States, you ended up with a lot of slaves going to, well, I don't know why this New York line's here. I really don't like it. Places like Charleston, Savannah, New Orleans, Mobile. These were major slave ports in the early era of the United States. The slave trade ended in the mid-1800s, and after that, Europe started to stake claims in Africa for natural resources, things like gold, diamonds, silver. In 1884, the European powers actually got together and carved out Africa. They said, here, Belgium, you have this piece. France, you take this. Germany, you take that. The United Kingdom, you take this. And so they carved out all these pieces. There were 0 people from Africa actually at this conference, but they split up the entire continent among these powers. And they didn't actually colonize and make these little settlements and farm. They just built mines. So not like the United States where they kept moving a little further inland and settled and built cities and all this. They just went straight from mine to port city. And so they would dig out the diamonds or whatever and bring them straight to the port. And most of these countries got their independence in the 1960s.